in the subsequent years now under the Xi era, what does Apple get right and what does it get wrong?
That's a really interesting question because what I've wondered about is that, in a certain sense, my thesis is that Apple has gone so deep into China that they're married and it's a Catholic marriage, right? There is no divorce.
Can't get
They
divorced.
can't
Right.
they can't get out of this.
I was
But
waiting
what
for
I've
the
wondered
metaphor to return. Yeah.
But what I've wondered is, like, I guess in my telling, it's kind of a cautionary tale. So the basic lessons would be something like, supply chain 101 would say you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And my criticism is that how did the company that built the world's most sophisticated supply chain make the supply chain 101 mistake, which is that you don't do that, especially as the country becomes belligerent and authoritarian, and you're contributing to building up your own rivals in the country, right? That seems to be quite an ironic and calamitous mistake. And so I would hope that, someone like Johnny Ive and Sam Altman probably don't need my book to understand this. I think Johnny Ive kind of lived this and can see it for himself. But I would hope that the lesson would be trading with China is fine, but the vast consolidation of everything, of training vast workforces and having your best engineers going to China on such a periodic basis. I mean, they literally convinced United Airlines to fly to cities they'd never flown to 3 times a week, with the understanding that Apple would buy so many first class seats that if the rest of the plane was empty, they would still make money. I mean, this is the kind of influence Apple was having, not just on
Yeah.
China, but on the airline industry, right? I mean, no company sort of is doing that sort of level of detail, that level of minutiae that Apple was. Um, so I would hope that the lesson is, for some young startup company, okay, fine to sell in China, fine to have some of our stuff there, but let's maybe make sure that we're never so reliant on foreign contract manufacturers, or at least foreign contract manufacturers of one country, that we find ourselves in the same position. However, it could equally be seen, if you're NVIDIA or someone like that has business in China, as a sort of template of, hey, Apple's wildly successful. How do we replicate what they've done so that we can make the same moves? And so that I don't really want to be a consultant for someone with that question, because I think, sort of on an ideological or geopolitical basis, that's not what I agree with. But it absolutely could be seen in that way, because if your measure of success is just like Apple's market cap, and their ability to scale in China, and you sort of have, I think, what I would call the 2000 mindset of not really considering the geopolitics, then of course they're an outstanding example. I mean, the other example, just to sort of, take this beyond Apple, would be Germany's deal to get natural gas piped in from Russia. I mean, that was in the Merkel era, right? I mean, we're not going so far back. And clearly they just weren't thinking about the geopolitical stakes of that. I mean, that's sort of what shareholder capitalism is. You find the best deal. You don't really consider the politics, right? You have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders. And this was sort of Germany. So it's not a corporation per se,
Yeah.
but that was the thinking. And in retrospect, I think of that as a very naive. And I think of Apple's issue being a combination of hubris and naivete. But it is fair to say, what did they do right? And essentially what they did right was they began to operate at the local level. Well, I guess I have to quickly back out. Give you a 15-second understanding that the biggest difference between Soviet communism and Chinese communism is that Moscow really was rule from the top. Communism in China is grassroots, is probably putting it in sort of cute terms, but the local cadres are essentially responding to a blueprint that Beijing puts out. And then they are responding proactively in ways that are sort of up to them as to how best to execute those plans. So someone might say there's a mandate to do electric vehicles, but what that means is that Shenzhen is going to compete with Hangzhou, which is going to compete with Suzhou, etc. And there's just massive competition. And China has really kind of found a way to introduce dynamism into the public sector in a way that we certainly don't have in the West. If you talk about bureaucrats in California, you're talking about people that are inhibiting your growth. Bureaucrats in China are more like a venture capitalist that sit on your board, invest in the company, and want to clear hurdles, clear obstacles to get you to build things. So there's something actually really impressive and competent about Chinese capitalism. And I wish Congress had more of a view of China's competence rather than just seeing them as a nation that just steals. My narrative is not that anything was stolen from Apple. My narrative is that Apple gave it away, and they gave it away for their own sort of selfish purposes. and in a political paradigm where they needed to demonstrate what they were giving in order to sort of get favors. And so, yeah, so if you wanted to get the positive lessons out of this, it would be to understand that power doesn't reside in Beijing. It resides at the local level, and that you would want to sort of distribute your production into various industrial clusters to work hand in glove with a bunch of local officials, and that you can get a lot out of them. Because if you understand the way that those municipalities in China compete, you
Yeah.
can leverage one against the other to get free factories and tooling and all sorts of things, and access to migrant labor and so forth. And if I'm really jumping ahead, if India is going to compete with China, they need a political system where local cadres, I guess you wouldn't call them cadres in India, but they would need to be incentivized in a similar way, because you somehow need that competition at the public level. Otherwise, things just take too long. And that's sort of the problem in America.